In 1994, Mark Knoll, who's a historian and professor at the University of Notre Dame, he wrote a book called The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind. Pulling no punches, the opening sentence in his book reads this: "The scandal of the evangelical mind is that there is not much of an evangelical mind." The book goes on to critique the lack of scholarship, the lack of deep thinking in the evangelical church. You might think, is Mark Knoll an angry atheist? No, he's an evangelical Christian and a scholar. And he just goes, what is it with evangelical Christianity that often lacks a depth to it? I started really struggling with that reality when I was in college. I started studying philosophy. I went to Moorpark College for a couple of years and then Cal State Northridge to finish off my bachelor's degree. And as I began wrestling with my own faith and asking questions that were being given to me, accusations, doubts, all of it, I found many Christians struggling to help me. I would bring them hard questions and they would just be like, just believe. And you're like, I'm trying, but what do you do with this? It's like, just simple faith, man, simple faith. I was like, that might work for you. It's not working for me. And so as I continued to grow in my relationship with Jesus and study and try to figure out how do I deal with the reality that oftentimes in the church there is a lack of deep intellectual thought. Some people kind of stay away from that. People in the church were afraid of me studying philosophy. They're like, don't do that. That's going to be harmful for your faith. I was like, well, this is harmful for my faith, not thinking about anything. And in Matthew 22, when Jesus is approached and asked, what is the greatest commandment? If you remember, Jesus says it is to love the Lord with your heart, soul, and mind. Oftentimes in the church, we don't even know what it means to love God with our mind. We're like, oh, I love God with my emotions. I sing passionately to him. Our emotions are for him. But he was like, I want your intellect. I made you as rational creatures. I want all of you. And so today, what I want to do is take kind of a whole Sunday to give some of the main reasons why I believe Christianity is the most plausible explanation for the world that we inhabit. Why Jesus is true. And so the Bible, and I'm going to do a lot of this without using the Bible, because that's sometimes what Christians do. They're like, hey, you don't believe in Jesus? Look at John 3:16. It says it right here. And it's like, well, I don't believe the Bible's God's word. It's like, well, now we're done. I've got nowhere to go from there. And so I'm going to read a couple verses at the top to help explain why this stuff matters. But the rest of the sermon is going to be more like a lecture to help those of you who are Christians be better equipped to understand why does Christianity make sense. And for those of you who are not Christians, just to think more deeply about Christianity, because many of you have maybe never heard that there are good reasons to actually be Christian. Now, I'm not going to pretend like this sermon is going to be a mic drop. You're going to go from atheist to Christian in the next 20 minutes. Just hold on. Realistically, if there's a scale of 0 to 10, 0 atheism, 10 faith in Jesus, if you're at like a 1, I'm hoping to move you to a 2, okay? Maybe a 3 if it's real good. But like those are my humble aspirations for the morning. I used to believe that apologetics, defending the faith, logical arguments can save people. I've found out they can't. But there are still wonderful reasons for why we should believe in Jesus, why I believe that Christianity makes the most sense. So I was reading recently in Luke's gospel, Luke chapter 1. Luke, we find out from another part of the New Testament in Colossians that Luke was a doctor. One of the reasons I like the Gospel of Luke is it feels like it's written from a deep thinker. Luke 1, this is how the gospel began. Many Christians, I think, when they approach the Bible, they think of the Bible as like a fairy tale. They wouldn't necessarily say it, but it's almost as if the Bible was written and it starts with once upon a time. And in Luke 1, Luke's attempt to give an account for the life of Jesus begins this way. Luke 1:1. Many have undertaken to complete a narrative about the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as the original eyewitnesses and servants of the word handed them down to us. It also seemed good to me, since I have carefully investigated everything from the very first, to write to you in an orderly sequence, most honorable Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things about which you have been instructed. Very different than once upon a time. Luke's going, hey, I have made it my life mission in this past season to get as much evidence for what took place in the life of Jesus. And he's writing in the first century, in the time of, right after, within a couple decades of Jesus having lived and died and risen from the dead. He said, I talked to eyewitnesses. I want you to be certain about these things. This is not a fairy tale. And 1 Peter chapter 3, just to give us one more reason why we should care about this stuff at all. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 says this, but in your hearts, regard Christ the Lord as holy, ready at any time to give a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Okay? So Peter's assuming, first of all, you're living in such a way that people are asking you questions about your life. But Peter goes, you should have reasons to defend the hope that you have within you. If someone says, why are you a Christian? You shouldn't just be like, I went to camp one time and woo, felt it. It's like, okay, that might be one reason, but that's not enough for many other people, right? And so today, literally, if there's a title for my sermon, it's Why Am I a Christian? Why am I a Christian? I was planning on preaching this this Sunday, and then I was getting my hair cut last month, and my barber, I sit down in the chair, and my barber goes, Brad, can I ask you a question? I was like, yeah. He's like, why are you a Christian? And I was like, all right, well, I'll answer that, but I'm also going to preach on that. I just needed that confirmation. And I've been hearing that question over and over lately. And so that's what I want to do this morning, just give some, so there's a chance it's going to be a small minority of you that are stoked on today. Others of you are like, what's happening? That's okay. You don't have to track everything. Some of you are not really into this. I'm asking you, just give me some time. I won't even tell you how much time. You're lucky there's an 11 a.m. service coming. Give me some time and some space. Some of it's going to resonate deeply with you. Some of it's not. And that's okay. I'm not pretending that every single sentence I say is like airtight, perfect. There's no rebuttals. I win. Okay? I'm just going, hey, here's why I'm a Christian. Obviously, Jesus, right? But for those who are like, I don't even know if Jesus existed, here is what I would say. So we're going to look at 9 different lenses, 9 different ways to think deeply about Christianity and explain why I believe it makes the most sense of the world, starting philosophically, okay? So we're looking philosophically, scientifically, historically, pragmatically, culturally, existentially. We're looking at a bunch of Lee words, and we'll start with philosophically. So I studied philosophy, loved philosophy. The word philosophy comes from 2 Greek words. Philo, which means love. Sophia means wisdom. The love of wisdom. When I heard that, I was like, why would anyone not study philosophy? I mean, it's just like, do you want to be a lover of wisdom? Yeah, this is what it is. Philosophy answers the deep questions of life. Is there a God? What is the purpose of life? How do we know things? What is beauty? All of those incredible things. There are many, many different philosophical arguments for the existence of God. And these first 4 main lenses that we're going to look at are kind of speaking more to atheism, trying to get you just to believe that there is a God. Okay, not like there's no God and now Jesus Christ rose from the dead. That takes a while. But just going from no God to a God, one of my favorite arguments for the existence of God is the Kalam cosmological argument. I remember I was sitting in a philosophy class, my favorite professor ever, Janice Dario. She was just a legend. I knew that she was Catholic because a friend of mine had taken her before. But if you didn't know that, she never said it. And she came into class each day with like almost a different personality. She would show up one day and act like she was an atheist, arguing for atheism. And she would destroy all the Christians in the room. And then one day she'd show up acting like she was a Mormon. And then one day a Christian. And then one day a deist. And like she would she knew all the arguments. And so one day
I was convinced she was an atheist based on the way she spoke about Christianity and God. I was like, there's no way this woman believes in God. And she did. She just kind of held her cards close to her chest. But one day she said, class began. So we're sitting in class. And she says, today, I want to talk to you about the Kalam cosmological argument. I'm like, okay, we don't know what that means, but sure. And she writes up on the board a simple argument, okay? And here are the two premises and the conclusion. Are we any luck with this projector? Come on. Wow. Mario Galliano, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This sermon just got 3% better with those slides. So thank you guys. Here's the
cosmological argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. So she wrote that on the board. Premise 1. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause. And she said, and that cause is spaceless, timeless, without energy. We could just call it God. And now most of the kids in the class are not Christians and have argued and been very clear about that. And so she has this on, at the beginning of class, she writes this on the board. And she says, okay, so does this argument prove that God exists? Can anyone refute it? And it's silent for a little bit. There's a couple kids that are like, well, no. Hey, what about, no, never mind. She gives it a few minutes. And she goes, okay, so we agree God exists? And it's silent. She says, all right, class is dismissed. We were in class for like 4 minutes. It was the greatest mic drop moment ever. And we thought she was joking. She was like, we just proved God existed. That's a lot for one day. You can go. And she let us go. I was like, this is my favorite woman in the world. Like she is brilliant. And so we walked out of the class and everyone was just like, what on earth? So this argument, there's a couple. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, obviously there are brilliant atheists who go, I disagree with premise 1, I disagree with premise 2, whatever, right? So here are a couple of the big arguments against this. One of the main arguments against this is that physics actually gives examples of things coming from nothing, okay? So I remember reading, because that was kind of a scary idea for me, it was like, well, maybe there is nothing, and then things can just pop into existence, because that's what some physicists say. So I ended up reading the book by Lawrence Krauss called A Universe from Nothing. He is an astrophysicist. He is way smarter than I am, okay? I read this book, and I understood about 7% of it, but I'm going to read you a part that I did understand. It was toward the end when Lawrence Krauss finally starts to define what nothingness means. And I was like, wait a second. He says this, first, I want to be clear about what kind of nothing I'm discussing at the moment. This is the simplest version of nothing, namely empty space. For the moment, I will assume space exists with nothing at all in it, and that the law of physics also exists. Okay, so in nothingness, the law of physics exists, of course. Once again, I realize that in the revised versions of nothingness, that those who wish to continually redefine the words so that no scientific definition is practical, this version of nothing doesn't cut the mustard. A few pages later, empty space is complicated. Did you know that? It is a boiling brew of virtual particles that pop in and out of existence in a time so short we cannot see them directly. It was like, oh, so nothing is something. And so something does not come from nothing. Something comes from something that looks like nothing, even according to astrophysicists. William Lane Craig, a brilliant, brilliant Christian philosopher, commenting on this idea of things coming into existence from nowhere, he says, if something can come into being from nothing, then it becomes inexplicable why just anything or everything doesn't come into being from nothing. Think about it. Why don't bicycles and Beethoven and root beer just pop into being from nothing? Why is it only universes that can come into being from nothing? What makes nothingness so discriminatory? There can't be anything about nothingness that favors universes, for nothingness doesn't have any properties, nor can anything constrain nothingness, for there isn't anything to be constrained. Pretty decent argument. If something exists, it has a cause. Things don't just magically pop into existence, okay? Now, the second rebuttal oftentimes is the multiverse. And I know some of you watch too many Marvel movies. The multiverse sounds like a good argument. It's like, well, okay, the Big Bang happened 4 billion years ago, but what happened before the Big Bang? It was actually an infinite amount of universes before that. And so the philosopher in me goes, wait a second, so the way you're going to explain how a universe came into being is by saying that there were an infinite number of universes that came before it. You can't even explain how one came into being, but it makes now more sense to explain that there were an infinite number of universes that were before it. That doesn't explain it. So I'm convinced one of the greatest philosophical arguments is, why is this here? And now someone go, wait a second, if everything needs a cause, what about God? Good question. God is outside of space. God is outside of time. God is not material. That's why God is the uncaused cause. Matter can't be the uncaused cause, okay? So philosophically speaking, that's one of the arguments. Scientifically speaking, I was sitting in another philosophy class, but it was a philosophy of science class. And the professor, who again was just an incredible man, who I enjoyed deeply, he was a diehard atheist, and I don't think I ever met another Christian in my CSUN classes in philosophy. It was a very much atheistic culture. And my professor would speak to us as atheists. He would address the class as atheists, ... And I was always like, hey, like, do I not exist? But that's what he'd say. And I remember there was one day in class, he said, as atheists, the most difficult thing for us to ever understand or explain, the reason why it's hard to be an atheist is this one reason. And I was like, please tell us now. He said, it's consciousness. Consciousness is the biggest dilemma for the atheist that they will never be able to explain. And it's something that haunts me. And I was like, I've never really thought about consciousness, but please explain more. So what is consciousness? Consciousness is the state of being aware, being able to think about yourself and being aware of your own surroundings, okay? So for example, this table up here, made of matter, is this table conscious or unconscious? Unconscious, good job. Panpsychists believe that matter is actually conscious, which is another, so if you're a panpsychist, you could have said this is conscious. But I think the majority of us don't think that, and this table is not aware of itself, okay? Pretty simple. The table's not up here going, why are there so many books on me? Look at these people looking at me. It is unaware. It is unconscious, okay? Now, think about if the Big Bang takes place, the only things that exist in the universe at that time it's matter, right? There's energy in these laws of physics which came from somewhere, but the things that exist are material. There weren't conscious beings or conscious things at the beginning. So what you have to do as an atheist is look at the Big Bang creating, however it happened, matter one day eventually woke up. Now, please hear me. I've said this many times on stage, and some Christians don't like it, but I believe that God used evolution to bring about humanity, okay? I preached on Genesis 1 last year. You can go look at my sermon on Genesis 1. Evolution is not incompatible with the Bible. Naturalistic evolution is incompatible with the Bible, meaning there's no God and evolution just happened. You can't be a Christian and believe that. Consciousness is this idea that we are aware of ourselves. And an atheist has a very difficult time understanding how on earth did things that were unconscious one day wake up and become conscious. Now, what many scientists love to do is just go, well, billions of years is a long time. And please hear me, that's fair. Billions of years is a really long time. But does anyone in this room think that this table, again, a table's a remarkable thing. If the Big Bang created a table, we'd go, wow. Let's pretend the Big Bang created a table, which it didn't, but it creates a table. Does anyone in their right mind think that given 1 billion years, this table could ever wake up and become conscious of itself? I'll even give you 1 trillion years. I'll give you infinite amount of time. Matter is not waking up and becoming conscious, okay? Now, you might think, well, that's not fair. Is that just what you think? Let me give you brilliant scientists' explanations for consciousness, okay? The first one is this. Sam Harris, who is a brilliant neuroscientist, in his book, Waking Up, here's what he says about consciousness. Whatever the ultimate relationship between consciousness and matter, almost everyone will agree that at some point in the development of complex organisms like ourselves, consciousness seems to emerge. Amen. This emergence does not depend on a change of materials, for you and I are built of the same atoms as a fern or a ham sandwich. Instead, the birth of consciousness must be the result of organization. Arranging atoms in certain ways appears to bring about an experience of being that very collection of atoms. This is, listen carefully, this is an atheist neuroscientist who's brilliant. This is undoubtedly one of the deepest mysteries given to us to contemplate. Okay? Richard Dawkins, in his book, The Selfish Gene, and again, very famous scientist, brilliant atheist, says this about consciousness. The evolution of the capacity to simulate seems to have culminated in subjective consciousness. Why this should have happened is to me the most profound mystery facing modern biology. Okay? Daniel Dennett, another brilliant atheist, quoted in Antony Flou's book, There Is a God. Antony Flew says this, about the origin of consciousness, Daniel Dennett, a die-hard physicalist, once wrote, and then a miracle happens. Okay? These are some of the most brilliant atheists around. And when it comes to the topic of consciousness, we're using words like miracles, strange mysteries. You, if you're an atheist in this room, you have to have some explanation for how rocks, given billions of years, one day woke up and became conscious beings. And I understand how evolution works. It takes time, a lot of change takes place. But consciousness is one of those things that will never be able to be explained from a scientific perspective. So, you have to have faith, to some degree, how that took place, okay? Similar to how these atheists do. Philosophically, scientifically, ethically, let's talk ethics. One of my favorite arguments for the existence of God is the moral argument, okay? Here's how William Lane Craig structures the moral argument. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2, objective moral values and duties do exist. Conclusion, therefore, God exists. Okay, let me help those of you who are like, what's happening? Ethically speaking, I do not believe that you have to believe in God to be a good person, okay? So some people are like, wait, are you saying I'm a bad person if I'm not a Christian? No, you can be a good person. I believe you're made in the image of God. So you can be good, do good. The question is, what is good if there is no moral standard outside of ourselves? And this is where this argument comes into place. If God doesn't exist, objective moral values and duties don't exist. Objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. So let me explain it this way. In my philosophy, getting my bachelor's degree, my final thesis paper, we had to interact with a philosopher and then make an argument. And mine, I loved Friedrich Nietzsche, who was a pretty brilliant atheist. And so I used his understanding of how the world works and then argued, and I want to be really sensitive here because I know this is a really difficult topic, and I don't want to I don't want to make a joke about this, but this was my thesis paper, was that if there is no God, rape is not wrong. And I had to not only write that paper, but I had to present it in front of the class, using Friedrich Nietzsche's understanding of a worldview. And this is what Friedrich Nietzsche believed, that if there's no God, there's no such thing as an objective moral standard. You might not like rape, but you can't say it's wrong, okay? And so I gave that argument in front of my class, and here's what the most terrifying thing was. Because they were consistent atheists in my class, they all said, you're right. We don't think it's good for the world. I prefer it not happening, but you are right. There is no way to say it's actually wrong objectively. because there's nothing outside. It's just it's an opinion. You have your opinions, I have my opinions. You think this is right, I think this is wrong. That's the end of the argument. If there's no thing outside of us dictating what is right or wrong, we are just evolved animals. That's all we are. You know, in nature, rape happens all the time. It's sexual coercion is what it's called. Chimpanzees do this regularly, and no one's arresting these chimpanzees. No one's saying, this is bad, this is wrong. This is what they do. The strong dominate the weak, and if they can take an advantage, they take the advantage. That's the world we're living in, if there's no God. Now, the question I would have for you is that the world you think you're actually living in? If you were a Jew living in a Nazi death camp, and Hitler were to be visiting that death camp, and for whatever reason, he gave you a moment to speak to him, and you've watched your entire family be killed. You're watching your entire society being destroyed. And you tell Hitler, this is wrong, you must stop. Hitler would say, this isn't wrong, this is right. It's the end of the argument. He's stronger than you in that moment. How could you argue with him other than pointing to, no, this is wrong. I promise, God will judge you for it. We will know this is wrong one day. It might not feel wrong to you right now, but it is wrong. If there's no God, there is no such thing as objective morals. So you have to do something with the fact that if we're living in a world without God, rape isn't wrong. You might be opposed to it, you might not. Genocide is not wrong. Lions kill zebras. They're stronger, they want it. Done. I don't imagine any of us in this room think that that is the world that we're currently living in. Now, please hear me. It might be. That might be the world we're living in. And because of evolution and our social evolution, we've created these ideas of what's right and wrong. Maybe. I'm just not very convinced it is. And I think it's very difficult for humans to live that way, okay? Tim Keller, in his book, Making Sense of God, he has a pretty funny quote, quoting a Russian philosopher. He says, Russian philosopher Vladimir Solovyov sarcastically summarized the ethical reasoning of secular humanism like this: man descended from apes, therefore we must love one another. That's the culture we're living in right now. It's insanity. It's like, yep, evolution without God, that we came from animals, and guys, we should be very kind to each other. Justice matters. It's like, what are you watching? Like, do you watch the same planet Earth I watch? Justice doesn't matter in the natural world at all. What the secular world has done is hijack a Christian worldview as a foundation and then gone, here's how we should live. Friends, you cannot make these statements of here's how you should live without a Christian foundation or another religion that has a God outside of it. Okay? So, ethically, I think is a very compelling argument. Again, these are kind of all building on each other. You might have, you're like, I wasn't very convinced with that one, but hopefully there's a weightiness to it. Existentially, right? If there's no God, your life is meaningless. If there's no God, there is no purpose to you being here. You are simply an accident. Now again, could that be true? It might be. Try getting out of bed believing that. Yuval Noah Harari, in his book, Sapiens, I have to be careful. Last time I quoted him, I said he's one of my favorites. Someone was like, he's an atheist, he's not a good guy. I was like, well, I meant like authors. I'm not talking about his character. I don't know who he is. But as an author, I really enjoy it. Yuval Noah Harari. Here's what Harari says. As far as we can tell, from a purely scientific viewpoint, human life has absolutely no meaning. Humans are the outcome of blind evolutionary processes that operate without goal or purpose. Our actions are not part of some divine cosmic plan, and if planet Earth were to blow up tomorrow morning, the universe would probably keep going about its business as usual. As far as we can tell at this point, human subjectivity would not be missed. Hence, any meaning that people ascribe to their lives is just a delusion. That's a consistent atheist for you. They're just going, it's all meaningless. Your life has no purpose. You came from nothing, you're going to nothing, and everything matters deeply now. It's like, no, it's nothingness now. So again, this may be true. I think you and I are utterly convinced that that's not reality. And what truth is that which corresponds to reality. And so this is why C.S. Lewis can say, if we find in ourselves desires that the world cannot fulfill, the greatest explanation is we were made for another world. And so maybe it's true that your life is completely meaningless, but I don't believe it is. Now, we're going to begin to move into a Christian approach. So those were kind of moving from atheism to deism. Now we'll kind of do our best to go, okay, why Jesus though? Like as of right now, any religion goes. Any religion that has a God, whatever, would work for my arguments thus far. Why would we need to narrow in on Christianity? Let's go with historically. History is one of my favorites. I'm going to make a statement that will sound ludicrous to some of you, but I'm very compelled by it. Here it is. I am convinced that the most reasonable explanation for the explosive growth of the early church and the continued expanse of the global church today is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I'm convinced it's the most reasonable explanation. Now, that might sound insane because, like, Brad, you can't say the most reasonable explanation is a miracle. That's impossible. Here's why I can say it. I think whatever explanation you have for the explosive growth of the early church and the continued growth of Christianity, despite its history over the last 2,000 years, whatever you choose is basically a miracle. It's just which miracle do you want to choose, okay? So I'm going to give you 6 main facts, historically speaking, and then you kind of can do with them what you want, okay? None of these are miracles in and of themselves, but I think they point to the miracle of Jesus' resurrection. Here's the first point. Jesus was a historical figure who was crucified under the authority of Pontius Pilate. Some Christians who were raised in the church, they think that's like not really true. It's just like, well, this is what we believe. Friends, that is a historical fact. Notice I left off the resurrection there. Plenty of historians disagree that the resurrection happened. But the fact is that Jesus was a real human being who died and was crucified under the authority of Pontius Pilate. Okay? Bart Ehrman, not a friend to Christianity at all. I believe he's a professor at University of North Carolina. And he is agnostic, leans atheist, and does his job as a New Testament professor to basically destroy the faith of Christians at his school, which is fun. But he wrote a book called Did Jesus Exist? Because as a historian, he kept hearing about all these people claiming, oh, the real Jesus of Nazareth didn't even ever exist. He's like, wait a second, are you insane? Of course he existed. And so this entire book is him arguing from a historical perspective. He does not believe in the resurrection. He does not believe in the divine. But he's going, the historical person, Jesus of Nazareth, was an absolute fact. So at one point he just says, there was a historical Jesus, a Jewish teacher of first century Palestine who was crucified by the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate. He goes, fact. He says, I've never met, he's like, I know thousands of history professors. He says, I've never met one that discounts that fact. He said, I've met some crazy people online, but no historian has ever doubted that reality, okay? So, Jesus, real person, crucified under Pontius Pilate. Second, Jesus was buried in a tomb which was found empty days later. Ken, I'm not saying he rose from the dead yet. I'm just saying he was buried in a tomb, and then a few days later when people started saying he was risen from the dead, other people went to that tomb and it was empty. Could people have stolen the body? Potentially. That is a possibility. People stole the body and everyone's like, it's empty, he rose from the dead, okay? Again, Bart Ehrman, though, talking about the Gospels, many of us, when we read the Bible, we think, well, it's just this divine book that fell out of heaven. You can't really trust it. Bart Ehrman says we can trust the Bible from a historical standpoint as long as it's not getting too crazy into the divine and miracles, okay? Here's what he says. There is historical information in the Gospels. This historical material needs to be teased out by careful critical analysis. Sometimes the Gospels of the New Testaments are separated from all other pieces of historical evidence and given a different kind of treatment because they happen to be found in the Bible, the collection of books that Christians gathered together and declared sacred scripture. However else the Gospels are used, for example, in communities of faith, they can and must be considered historical sources of information. So Bart Ehrman, when he reads, listen to this, like when Bart Ehrman reads the Gospel of Mark in the Bible, he's reading it as a historical document. Now, the moment there's miracles, Bart Ehrman's like, nah, those silly people, that didn't really happen. But when there aren't miracles taking place in the Gospels, he's like, historical fact, historical fact, historical fact. That's generally how historians read the Bible. Christians just go, it's all miraculous. And historians go, no, the New Testament is an incredible source of history for us, okay? Third point, and I've got to hustle here. First century Jews did not believe their Messiah would be divine or raised from the dead before the final resurrection, okay? There may have been a very small crew of people that thought the Messiah was divine, but the vast majority did not believe this coming Messiah was going to be God or that he would raise from the dead in the middle of history, okay? As Christians, we're like, of course the Messiah is God, and of course the Messiah rose from the dead 2,000 years ago. Friends, tell an Orthodox Jew today, Jesus is God in the flesh, and they'll be like, that's really crazy and really offensive. That is the Jewish thought, the vast majority of history, okay? So let's say the body disappeared out of the tomb. The disciples don't show up to an empty tomb and go, he rose from the dead, yay! We knew he was going to do it. They believed in a final resurrection at the end of time, but they did not believe that random people were just going to be raised from the dead in the middle of history, okay? Number 4, hundreds of people claimed to see the physically risen Jesus. Again, could it have been mass hallucination? We don't have any recorded mass hallucinations where people are all seeing the same thing. We have recorded mass hallucinations, people at Woodstock, seeing a lot of different things. 500 people didn't trip out on LSD and go, Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. Okay? So again, could all these people be lying? Possibly. Maybe they all lied, but they said they saw Jesus risen from the dead. 5th, I think one of the most compelling things, many of Jesus' first followers were martyred for refusing to deny seeing the risen Jesus. Okay? This is where, like, you have to make sense of this. It's one thing to go to an empty tomb and be like, he's not here. You know what I think happened? I think he rose from the dead. Cool. People believe wild things all the time. Then those people were marched in front of Caesar and were said, if you keep saying Jesus was risen from the dead, we're going to feed you to lions. We're going to burn you and impale you on poles. And those people said, we saw him. You can do that to us. That's fine. Is that what humans do? You're like, well, what was in it for them? Death. There was a small group of them. It's people die for things they think are true all the time. I want you to hear that, okay? Other religions, people die for things that they believe deep in their hearts. That's true. Who dies for something they know as a fact is wrong? That's a very different thing. Those disciples, if they were the ones who stole the body out of the tomb, and then, hey, reject Jesus risen from the dead or we're going to kill you. Kill me. It's like, okay, maybe that's what happened. I think I know human nature a little bit better, and that's probably not what happened, okay? And last point under history is another staggering reality. Christianity grew from 12 followers to 6 million in 300 years without the use of violence, which other religions have grown that way, political power, or financial privilege, and under constant persecution. Choose your miracle. Yuval Noah Harari, again, tracing history in his book Sapiens. This is one of my favorite quotes. He's talking about the Apostle Paul. He says, Paul's arguments, when he was spreading the gospel, fell on fertile ground, to say the least. Christians began organizing widespread missionary activities aimed at all humans. In one of history's strangest twists, the esoteric Jewish sect took over the mighty Roman Empire. That is a strange twist. Some might call it a miracle. You have to do something with Jesus, historically. And I'm convinced the thing that makes the most sense, does it still require faith? Yeah. But I think it still makes the most sense. The most reasonable explanation is he actually rose from the dead. That's how this happened, okay? So, culturally, this is another one of my favorite arguments and understandings of Christianity. Christianity is the only religion that has truly spread throughout every culture. Okay? Tim Keller, in his book, Making Sense of God, he says it this way. One of the unique things about Christianity is that it is the only truly worldwide religion. Over 90% of Muslims live in a band from Southeast Asia to the Middle East and Northern Africa. Over 95% of all Hindus are in India and immediate environs. Some 88% of Buddhists are in East Asia. However, about 25% of Christians live in Europe, 25% in Central and South America, 22% in Africa, 15% and growing fast in Asia, and 12% in North America. Professor Richard Bauckham writes, almost certainly Christianity exhibits more cultural diversity than any other religion, and that must say something about it. Isn't that wild? Like if I made a religion, it could maybe crush it in Southern California. Like I get SoCal culture pretty well. I've lived here my whole life. Like if I was like, okay, what would help get the most amount of people to understand this? I could maybe create a little cult, have a little following. It makes some of you nervous, but follow where I'm going with this. Now bring that to India? Bring that to Africa? Bring that to Asia? It's like, nah, that doesn't work. That doesn't make sense to us. Can we see the map? Does the map work? Obviously, it's very small. Christianity is the purple. All the other religions, they're local. They make sense to a group of people. They have a very difficult time spreading outside of their boundary. Christianity has been everywhere. It transcends every culture. And 12 random guys 2,000 years ago, fishermen, they did this, man. They're sharp dudes. Some of them were illiterate, but they had a feeling this was going to go places. It's shocking. So that's culturally. How about religiously? I majored in philosophy. I minored in religious studies. So I got to study all the other major religions. It's a simplification, but it's not by much. Christianity is fundamentally different from every other religion. Every religion is distinct in some ways, right? But at the end of the day, every religion has some form of salvation, some form of heaven, some form of God that you're trying to get to. And the way you do that is you following the Eightfold Path, by you doing the 5 pillars, you doing things. Christianity is fundamentally different. Tim Keller says that religion says, I obey, therefore I'm accepted. The gospel says, I'm accepted, therefore I obey. Grace is what separates Christianity from everything else. God becoming man, dying in the place of his enemies, separates Christianity from everything else. The idea that we work our way to heaven, we work our way to nirvana, we work our way to paradise, whatever it is based on you, feels very man-made. God coming down to rescue you despite you, I wouldn't have made that up. I have a hard time believing it after following Jesus for 15 years. My flesh reverts to works of the law. If I could just be better, if I just have better prayer time, if I just read the Bible more, then God's going to love me. And the Bible's like, I love you. I've already proven it through the death of Jesus Christ in your place. I remember talking to a Muslim friend years ago, and I was talking about this idea of grace, and he was like, man, that is different. I said, can I ask you, like, do you know where you stand with Allah? Like, do you know he accepts you? He said, no, you can't know until the final day. Because on the final day, your works are judged on the giant scale, and we'll see whether I'm worthy or not. And I said, oh man, how do you try to love a God like that? How do you try to love a God who you don't know he loves you? He likes you. He accepts you. He's like, it's hard. So can you imagine being in a marriage? You're like, does your wife love you? I don't know yet. I'm hoping after 40 years, my good deeds outweigh my bad deeds. And right now, it's not looking good at all. Like, what? Again, I'm not saying it's not true because of that. Maybe it's still true. Christianity is the only religion where God says before you even start, I love you, I like you, I want you. And that frees you up to obey him. I'm not on a treadmill going, do you like me now? Do you like me now? Do you like me now? It'd be exhausting, and I think it would create a hatred for him. So, religiously, we're almost done. You guys have been champions. I had over 20 things. I know. 2 left. This one will be quick. Experientially. Again, this is what most Christians bank on. Experientially. It's important. It's not everything. I am a Christian because of my experiences. It's part of it. I am a changed man. I know Brad Sarian at 19 years old and the trajectory I was on. I am a different human being than that. I just am. I know Jesus Christ has changed me deeply. You can argue with that. That's fine. I know. I also know, funny enough, that you're sitting in this room because I had a vision 10 years ago that we were supposed to plant a church in the San Fernando Valley. A vision, prayer, saw it happen. So you can still argue with my experiences, but you're sitting here based on that. I've encountered God in significant ways. Like I've had encounters with God that I cannot explain. So experience matters. I could talk way more about that, but for the sake of time. I've also seen healings. I've seen healings that you cannot explain any other way. We pray, doctor had said this, scan said this, prayer, healed, mystery. It's like, not a mystery, but sure. Unbelievable. Last thing is this, and I'll end with this. Pragmatically. Pragmatics is what works best. And this can be a very dangerous thing in and of itself. But I've come to love pragmatics when it comes to Christianity. Christianity works. It just works. It's remarkable. I remember sitting with a friend, one of the guys who got saved in our church early on. He was living his secular dream, sexually promiscuous, pursuing his worldview, doing everything he can. Life was going decently well from the outside. And I remember we were talking, he was arguing about Jesus, and I just said this. I said, how's it working out for you? And I didn't think much of it. But later on, he became a Christian, and he told me that question haunted me. He said, because it wasn't working. What I was trying to do, it was not working. Now you might go, well, who cares? Friends, the definition of truth is that which corresponds to reality. And if the worldview that you're trying to live in doesn't match reality, it's not true. The secular dream right now, the secular culture is trying to tell you, you can breathe underwater, basically. And you're like, okay, let me try. You go underwater, you like almost die, you come up, you're like, that didn't work. They're like, no, we promise, it works. You're like, okay, I'm looking at other people trying, like maybe there's something wrong with me. You go back underwater, try to breathe again, and you're like dying, you come back out, and you're like, friends, it doesn't work. The secular narrative, you're free, do whatever you want. There's no God. Have fun. People are trying it and they're choking to death, going, this isn't working. I'm numb. I'm anxious. I'm depressed. This is killing me. And I go, because it's not true. It does not correspond with reality. I just finished a book called Never Enough. The tagline is from barista to billionaire. This dude was a barista, and through some incredible business entrepreneurial stuff, he becomes a billionaire. You're like, I think I know what $1 billion is like. No, you don't. Millionaires make $500 an hour. Billionaires make $500,000 an hour. Can you imagine being able to buy a house every hour? That's how much money this guy has. And it's a tragedy. He's like, why is this not satisfying? He's like, there must be something wrong with me. We're going to probably preach Ecclesiastes next. I'm just going to quote that book just over and over and over. He's like, there has to be more than this. So yeah, because it doesn't correspond to reality. You were made for a different world. Money can't satisfy your soul. Sex can't satisfy your soul. Fame can't satisfy your soul. Only Jesus can. Mr. Beast was just recently on a podcast in an interview. Mr. Beast is the most famous YouTuber in the world. He's trying to get 1 billion subscribers. He has almost 400 million right now. He's famous. He's got money. He's got fame. He's got it all. And the interviewer asked him, are you happy? He said, I'm more unhappy than happy. At what point are we just going to go, this doesn't work? Trying to breathe underwater doesn't work. Try Jesus. He works. He saves us. He satisfies us. He loves us. He forgives us. The problem with a sermon like that is it's still geared to your intellect. And the problem is, if you're not a Christian, your main problem isn't your intellect. It's our sinful desires. We want to be king. We think we know the way to the good life. And Jesus goes, how's it working for you? Okay, well, it's not going great yet, but give me another decade. He's like, I don't want you to waste another decade. Come and follow me. Come and trust me. I give my life for you. Why am I a Christian? Because Jesus Christ died for me and he rose from the dead. He's changed me. He's changed history. Would you trust in him? Let me finish with a quote from Ross Douthat. He just wrote a book. He's a New York Times columnist. He is Catholic, but he writes for the New York Times. He just wrote a book, Believe, and it's basically why you should have faith in something, in some religion. And he ends it with a case study on why he's a Christian personally. And I love this last quote. He said, life is short and death is certain. And what account will you give of yourself if the believers turn out to have been right all along? That you took pointlessness for granted in a world shot through with signs of meaning and design? That you defaulted to unbelief because that seemed like the price of being intellectually serious or culturally respectable? That you were too busy to be curious, too consumed with things you knew to be passing, to cast a prayer up to whatever eternity waits? Friends, if you're a Christian, man, I pray this would strengthen your faith. That you would no longer just be like, I believe because I got the burning bosom. Praise God for that. But Christianity makes that intellectual sense. And for those of you who are maybe at a 2, hopefully you're moved to a 4, maybe by the grace of God you want to be moved to a 10, you can do that today. Jesus loves you. He wants you. He's for you. Let me pray.